Welcome everyone. I'm going to just get started. Ralph is a National Register and Survey Coordinator at the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. And I met Ralph back in 2008 at the Southwest Detours in Albuquerque, New Mexico conference. And then I visited Ralph in Little Rock after the Odyssey in the Ozarks conference in 2010, and he was working with my grad school classmate, Vanessa Norton McEwen. And just remind you all to stay muted, and I'll read, Ralph, your questions at the end.
Okay, you all ready?
Yep.
Well, good evening, everybody. I am the National Register and Survey Coordinator with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. I've been in this position since April of 2002, but my love for the roadside goes back probably to my grad school internship in 1996, when I worked with the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, documenting sites along the Lincoln Highway in southern Pennsylvania. That summer, I surveyed for a few historic districts and also wrote a National Register nomination for the Ship of the Alleghenies, which was my first foray into National Register work. My job here in Arkansas, I have the flexibility, thank goodness, to be able to kind of work on some projects on my own. And the Negro Motorist Green Book is a project that my office has been involved in for several years, documenting and also working to a certain degree with the National Register of Historic Places with Green Book properties around the state. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about Arkansas, its geography, how that influenced the Green Book here. Also how our highway development influenced the Green Book. We'll talk about properties that we've discovered during our survey of the state's properties, and then also talk about some of the challenges with those properties going forward as far as funding and preservation and those kinds of things. So we'll go ahead and get started. When one looks at the state of Arkansas, if you draw a line from the northeast corner to the southwest corner, you get roughly two triangular parts of the state. The northwest half, for the most part, is hilly with mountainous and often very rugged terrain. And the southeast half, on the other hand, is flat or roughly flat with the Mississippi Delta land and large swaths of pine forests. This topo map really shows it well. The brown to the northwest are the Ozarks and other mountain ranges, while the greenish area to the south and the east is the Delta area of the state. Agriculture in the northwest half of the state, when it existed historically, was comprised of small family farms, while the southeast half historically encompassed large plantations and timberlands harvested by large timber companies. As a result, the majority of the state's African-American population lived in the southeast half of the state, where they worked on the plantations or for the timber companies. The same holds true today. Most of the state's African-American population still lives in the southeast half of the state. And this fact played an important part and an important role in our state's Green Book properties. Although some laws were passed regarding road building in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, the majority of road building efforts, and more importantly, the funding, was a county responsibility in our state. The state initially, early on, did very little in the way of road building or funding of road building. The transformation of road building in Arkansas to a statewide effort really got a boost in 1913 with Act 302, which established our state's Highway Commission. The commission consisted of 3 members. There was the Commissioner of State Lands, Highways, and Improvements, along with 2 other members that were appointed by the governor, who served staggered 2-year terms. The number of members on our State Highway Commission, however, would be increased by the early 1920s, as you see here. Act 302 also defined the responsibilities of the Department of State Lands, Highways, and Improvements. It said that the general supervision over road construction and maintenance, they were to furnish counties and improvement districts with advice and assistance. They were to prepare and distribute information relative to roads, bridges, drainage levees, and other public improvements, distributing available funds for the construction of public roads, overseeing the efficient utilization of county and state convicts, and also promoting greater interest in the improvement of Arkansas's highways. The act also established the first highway improvement fund that was funded by an annual $10 license fee on motor vehicles. Arkansas now had the tools and mechanisms in place to seriously pursue construction of an improved highway system. The highway system would have been an important link in our state's transportation infrastructure, especially as our automobile and truck traffic increased during the 1920s. Once the automobile came to the state, it quickly grew in acceptance. There were 8,010 automobiles registered here in 1915, but by the 1920s, it had grown astronomically. In 1923, we had just over 102,000 automobiles registered. And by the following year, in 1924, it was over 124,000. The dramatic increase in the number of cars and trucks on our roads during the 20s necessitated a lot of improved highway infrastructure, including roads and bridges. The increased use of the automobile in Arkansas not only allowed people to travel for necessity, but it also brought about the use of the automobile for leisure travel. The 19 teens through the 1930s was a period in which auto tourism really began to become a popular pastime. As has been noted, automobile tourism's flexibility of action enabled motorists to linger and see the places through which they passed, and they could see new places off the beaten track of railroad travel. In addition, there were several organizations that helped to foster tourism, not only here in the state, but around the country. The best known of these, of course, was the AAA, which was founded in Chicago in March of 1902, and provided motorists with what were called AAA Blue Books, which contained detailed route descriptions, maps, and lists of garages and hotel accommodations. AAA, with the help of Boston telephone pioneer Charles J. Glidden, also organized the Glidden Tours between 1905 and 1913, which were designed to show the practicality of interstate highways and the usefulness of the automobile as a means of long-distance transportation. Other resources and organizations also existed, such as the Automobile Legal Association, which was in the northeastern United States, that published the Automobile Green Book, which was a road reference and tourist's guide. And of course, for African Americans, there was the Negro Motorist Green Book, which became an invaluable resource for automobile travel beginning in the 1930s. The problems that African Americans encountered while traveling led to the establishment of the Negro Motorist Green Book in 1936. Another publication called the Travel Guide would also this travel guide in 1936, it has been our idea to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and to make his trips more enjoyable. Although the first edition only covered the New York City area, it was turned into a national guide in 1937. By 1949, the guide not only included the United States, but it also included Canada, Mexico, and Bermuda as well. The travel guide argued in its publications that segregation was bad for white-owned businesses when they wrote, "Hundreds of millions of dollars are spent annually by discerning members of minority groups in the course of their travels throughout the US. Many worthy enterprises, unaware of the tremendous potentialities, deny themselves of this revenue. It is the purpose of Travel Guide to assist in bringing these two groups together for the benefit of all." Interestingly, even though the Negro Motorist Green Book provided a great service to motorists, The publishers eagerly awaited the time when the guide would no longer be necessary. In the guide's introduction, they wrote, "There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish information for your convenience each year." The guide gave its users the name and address of each establishment. In addition, for the larger cities, such as Chicago, it gave listings of things to see and do. The guide also gave safe driving rules for motorists, such as maybe the cop won't catch the car that passes you at 80, but sudden death is liable to. Or don't assume that the other fellow has good brakes. The Green Book continued to grow in popularity and scope in the 1950s. By 1956, it expanded to include South America and the West Indies. But by 1964, with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Green Book was no longer needed and publication ceased. When the Green Book was published, Arkansas had several U.S. highways, and not surprisingly, the Green Book properties were clustered along those highways. The major north-south highways in Arkansas included US 61, 65, 67, 71, and 79. And the state's major east-west highways included US 62, 64, 70, and 82. If you remember the topography and demographics of Arkansas, with the majority of the state's African-American population living in the southeast half of the state, then it should come as no surprise that the majority of our state's Green Book properties were also found in the southeast half of the state. And each of the stars represents a community where Green Book properties were located around our state. Once a traveler got north and west of the Little Rock area, listings in the Green Book became few and far between. Conway, Russellville, Fort Smith, and Fayetteville were the only communities in the northwest half of our state that had listings in the Green Book. As a result, any African-American traveler in that part of the state had to plan their route and travel time very carefully in order to be near communities where properties existed near a mealtime or when it was time to stop for the night. Our state's initial efforts to survey our Green Book properties began in 2010 after we had discovered a 1949 edition of the Green Book online. However, once the entire collection of Green Books had been digitized by the New York Public Library, a more in-depth survey of our state's resources was completed in 2017. We put together a spreadsheet, and I've included just a short section of it here to see how we kind of kept track of things. We had it organized by town with the businesses and their addresses, and then also which years they each appeared in the Green Book. At the time that our survey work was done, we determined that 30 Green Book properties were surviving. And we have learned that about 150 of our properties have been lost. So our survival rate, unfortunately, is very, very small. However, with a significant number of our properties, approximately 45, we were not able to determine the current status of the property. With most of those, it's due to an incomplete address. Many properties at that time, especially in small towns, just gave a street name and didn't necessarily include a house number. However, the types of properties that survive include a wide variety of property types, from restaurants and tourist homes to hotels and motor courts. Arkansas still had examples of Green Book properties in its towns and cities. And I wanted to show some of the properties that we found during our survey a few years ago. The largest surviving number of Green Book properties in our state, as well as the most impressive Green Book property found, were located in Hot Springs. However, given the fact that Hot Springs has been famous for almost 2 centuries as a destination to take the waters, the fact that we found the most properties in Hot Springs was not surprising to our staff. The most impressive property in Hot Springs was the Woodman Hotel, also known as the National Baptist Sanitarium. It was listed in the Green Book from 1931 until 1941, or 39, excuse me, until 1941, and was also called the National Baptist Sanitarium in the Green Book from 1957 until 1964. It was the most luxurious and well-appointed facility for African Americans in Hot Springs. The Supreme Lodge of the Woodmen of Union bought the site of the building in 1919, and the building was built in 1923 and dedicated in January of 1924. Since the building was built for the activities of the fraternity, it housed a variety of activities. According to the National Register nomination, it housed a 100-bed hospital and nurse training school, a 75-room bath hotel, the Woodmen of Union Bank, a 2,500-seat auditorium, which featured such attractions as Count Basie and Duke Ellington, an electrically operated printing plant, and executive offices. After the hotel closed in 1981, it remained vacant until it was renovated into senior housing in the early 2000s. And this is what the building looks like today. However, Hot Springs had other types of properties for African Americans, including small-scale motor courts. The Mackenzie Court, which you see here, for example, was a small-scale motor court of 4 small buildings located in one of the city's residential neighborhoods. The complex was built after the city's 1950 Sanborn fire insurance map was completed, but was listed in the Green Book beginning in 1952 until the last edition was published in 1964. Another small-scale property that we found was the Edmondson Tourist Court, and also it was sometimes called the New Edmondson Tourist Home. It was also built in the early 1950s and was listed in the Green Book from 1957 until 1962, and then again in 1964. It consisted of a small-scale tourist court building located next to the main house, and an advertisement for the property touted that it was centrally located and had comfortable rooms. Although it's been altered today with the awnings on the front, you can still see that it resembles the building that appeared in the advertisement in the 1950s. In the town of Camden in Southwest Arkansas, there were several surviving Green Book properties located in a group on South Adams Street. Next to each other were the building that housed Jim Summers Restaurant, located in the upper left corner, which was listed in the Green Book from 1949 until 1955, and a large building that housed, among other things, the Oil City Barbershop, which was listed in the Green Book in 1948 and 1949. At the north end of the group of buildings is the building that was Summers Hotel and Court, and it was listed in the Green Book from 1954 until 1961. Summers also operated a liquor store, which was listed in the Green Book from 47 until 55, although that building has since been demolished. It was actually located across the street from this grouping. Some communities around our state, such as the City of Hope, had hotels that were listed in the Green Book. The Lewis Wilson Hotel, which you see here, was one example, and it was listed in the Green Book starting in 1947 and stayed listed until the last edition was published in the 1960s. Built about 1910, the building was already a hotel and a restaurant by the 1920s, and you can see that on the Sanborn map from March of 1926. It is not known when the hotel closed, but as you can see, it has suffered significant alterations in the time since it closed, and it's now in use as a lawnmower repair shop. Alley's Garage was one of a number of Green Book properties located in Pine Bluff, which is to the southeast of Little Rock. It's located on US 79, and it's across from the campus of the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, which is a historically Black college and university. As a result, it was in a really great location to cater to the African American community, not only the local community in Pine Bluff, but also travelers who are passing through on 79. The building employs a Quonset hut, which is a building type that was developed during World War II and one that would have been easy and inexpensive to build. Alley's Garage was listed in the Green Book beginning in 1947, and it was there until 1955, and then it was listed again from 1960 until 1961. Although the building's original canopy, which would have been on the left-hand side, has been enclosed, the form of the original building is still very easily discernible. As I had said earlier, few Green Book properties existed to the northwest of Little Rock. However, one of the properties that did exist was in Conway and was listed as the Deluxe Diner from 1961 until 1964. The restaurant was opened as the Golden Drag Cafe by Richard and Ruby Manley in 1936. It was located in another area at that time, but moved to this building in the early 1940s. The building is very easily recognizable when compared to the historic photograph, and it's currently in use today as a church. Interestingly, the building is built out of decorative concrete block, which gives it an interesting look for not a lot of money. If you were an African-American traveler in Northwest Arkansas looking for a place to stay, chances are that you would end up staying in a tourist home. Tourist homes tended to be large homes where guests could rent rooms similar to today's bed and breakfast. In Fort Smith, Mrs. H. Ullery operated a tourist home at 719 North 9th Street, and it was listed in the entire run of Green Books, and it was one of 3 tourist homes listed in the city of Fort Smith. The house actually dates to around the turn of the 20th century, and it's possible that the house's role as a tourist home both pre and post dated the Green Book era. We have found that some properties that were listed in the Green Book continued to be operated after the Green Book ceased publication in the mid-60s. Today, the house is still a residence, and as you can see, it's pretty well maintained even today. When my staff and I completed our initial survey work in 2010, we identified one property that we felt was eligible for individual listing in the National Register of Historic Places, and that was the Lattimore Tourist Home in the city of Russellville, also northwest of Little Rock. We had it listed on the National Register on January 27th of 2012. Like the Ullery Tourist Home in Fort Smith, the Lattimore Tourist Home was listed in the Green Book during its entire publication run from the 1930s to the 1960s. In fact, the Lattimore Tourist Home continued in operation up into the 1970s, and we were able to determine that from people in the community who remembered it and knew the family who operated it. Also, like the Ullery Tourist Home, this house was built around 1900 and came into its role as a tourist home later. Today, the Lattimore Tourist Home is threatened with demolition. It's owned by a church, and the church wants to use the land to construct an addition on their current building. However, there is a local effort in Russellville to move the building 2 blocks south to a local park, and we have already had that proposed move approved by the National Park Service so that if it does get moved, it can retain its National Register listing. Unfortunately, the threatened status of the Lattimore Tourist Home is all too common with our Green Book properties. Many Green Book properties have already been lost, and even since our survey started in 2010, more have been lost to the wrecking ball. And one example of that is the Deluxe Court, which was a tourist court in North Little Rock. This was located on East Broadway, which was the route of US 70 through North Little Rock. And it was the main route east of Little Rock and North Little Rock on the way to Memphis. The Deluxe Court Tourist Home was listed in the Green Book between 1947 and 1964. Unfortunately, shortly after we documented the property in 2012, it was demolished later that year. And today, the only building that remains is the duplex dwelling that's in front of it, right next to the highway. Although it was disheartening and not totally surprising that we found so many of the state's Green Book properties had disappeared, It was also exciting to find out that several of our properties did remain. However, preserving the buildings that do remain comes with several challenges. First, one of the largest challenges is finding viable uses for the buildings that are in communities that are often very different today than when the properties were built. The second challenge is finding the funding for maintenance or restoration of the surviving resources. Obtaining grant funds for restoration is often dependent on a property being listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Right now in Arkansas, the Lattimore Tourist Home and the Woodman Hotel National Baptist Sanitarium are the only Green Book properties in Arkansas that are individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We do have a few properties around the state that fall either within the Pleasant Street Historic District in Hot Springs or within several of the historic districts in Little Rock. These two properties here were also tourist homes, and they are both located here in Little Rock. But the vast majority of the surviving Green Book properties don't have any type of historic designation, which makes finding funding for restoration and preservation very difficult. Furthermore, National Register designation in many cases will be challenging due to changes to the properties and the loss of integrity. As we noted with Allie's Garage earlier, the canopy, which is a very character defining feature of a gas station, has been enclosed. And so you don't necessarily have that feel of the building anymore. And this is what we found with a lot of the buildings that still survive, is that they often don't retain or don't reflect their historic appearances. Today, the history of many of Arkansas's Green Book properties has largely been forgotten. Although the release of the movie Green Book in 2018 has helped to bring attention to the significance of the Green Book and its properties, there is still a long way to go in order to ensure the preservation of these properties. Hopefully, as time goes by, greater attention will be brought to the surviving Green Book properties, and more can be done to allow them to be preserved for future generations. And I will say, here in Arkansas, one of my agency's sister agencies is going to be hosting a Smithsonian exhibit that is a traveling exhibit on the Green Book and its properties. The exhibit is currently in Memphis at the National Civil Rights Museum and will be there until March 1st of this year. And then it comes to the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center here in Little Rock beginning May 8th and will be here until August 1st of this year. The exhibit will then move on to several other locations throughout 2021 and 2022. More information on the exhibit can be found at Negro Motorist Green Book.si.edu. And I thank you all for being here. And if there are questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ralph.
Sure.
Someone said, how important is it that these properties retain integrity as defined by the National Register, or should integrity be relaxed a little due to outside forces that often affected integrity, such as the Civil Rights Act, neighborhood disinvestment, and neglect?
Here's what I will say about that. In my experience in working with the National Park Service with the National Register, I have found over the years that the National Park Service tends to be a little bit more lenient with integrity with properties that are related to African American history. And I suspect that it's because the number of properties that remain is often a lot less. And I first ran across this about 15 years ago when our state was looking at Rosenwald schools, which were built all across the South for African Americans. We had started out with almost 400 of those schools, but by the time we did our survey, we found less than 20 of those surviving. So the ones that were surviving were very important for their associations with that program and the effort to provide education for African Americans. And so we were able to get some schools listed that did not have outstanding integrity, but were significant because of the fact that so few remained. And so it's very possible that with the Green Book properties, the Park Service would kind of take the same view. You know, they are important and not many survive. And so those that do survive carry a greater weight than what they would have originally.
Okay. So, well, someone's asked about getting inside of the buildings and if there was, were traces of their Green Book use. I guess maybe that, like that complex you pointed out.
Unfortunately, we have not been inside any of the buildings. The way that our survey worked is we often did the hunting for Green Book properties in conjunction with other things that we were looking at in the same area. And we often do that when we do a survey trip, just because of limited time and somewhat limited travel. We tend to group several things together in one trip. It's very possible, especially with something like the Lattimore Tourist Home or the Ullery Tourist Home, which were in use for so many years, that there are vestiges of their Green Book use still left on the inside. We have not seen any interiors to really know one way or the other at this point.
Someone said, congratulations for undertaking this so relatively early. Did you look at other later guides than the Green Book?
We haven't. We kind of just focused on Green Book because they were easily accessible through the New York Public Library website. They're digitized on there, and you can browse through them for all of the states. And so that's why we had focused on the Green Book. Obviously, as we look at this more in depth going forward, we will probably try to look at some of the other sources and see what else we find.
This is from Stephanie Stuckey. Her family business is in the Green Book, and although she says, I haven't personally seen the entries, how can I confirm which specific Stuckey's stores were in the Green Book? I would like to make sure that our locations that are still standing are not only preserved, but would like to work to have historical markers erected at these sites. Thank you.
As far as Stuckey's stores, I don't remember any of those being listed in the Green Book, and I say that because I know that Arkansas has, I think, 3 or 4 Stuckey's buildings that survive, and they were built along our interstates, and our interstates. Some of our interstate highways opened prior to the Green Book ceasing publication. And so I don't remember seeing Stuckey's listed in any of the Green Books, especially the later ones.
Someone asked, is there a museum in Arkansas or elsewhere which focuses on Green Book history? Any possible museum sites in Arkansas, like the Lattimore Tourist Home in Russellville?
We don't have any museum sites currently that focus on the Green Book. We do have some museums in the state that are focused on African American history. The Mosaic Templars Cultural Center in Little Rock is one of our sister agencies. I don't know what the city of Russellville is planning once they do move the Lattimore Tourist Home. That would provide an excellent opportunity for a potential museum, especially since it will be moved to a city park. But right now I don't know, and I'm not sure that they really know what the final plan is. I think they're just focused right now on trying to save the building and then look at possible uses down the road.
And someone asked, where did you get the funding for the survey you conducted?
Our state is very, very fortunate in that we have a pretty good travel budget through our department budget. Our state historic preservation office, which is what we are part of, is funded in our state partially through the real estate transfer tax. And so when housing sales are up, our collections are up. So we kind of have an interesting funding source in that way. I have worked here almost 20 years, and travel in-state has never been a problem, and I'm usually somewhere out in the field 1 to 2 days every week. So we are very, very fortunate compared to a lot of states when it comes to the ability to travel.
Someone asked about the travel guides being available online. I can answer that. And I see someone else did that. I know the New York Public Library has digital versions that you can look at.
Oh, okay, then I'll have to check those out because I was not aware of that.
Yeah, I teach a Route 66 class, and I had an assignment for students to look at the different years, and I was able to use it. Yes, some people posted some links in the chat.
Okay.
Let's see. Are many or all of the Green Book businesses owned by African Americans?
That's a good question, and I really don't know the answer to that. I know that the Lattimore Tourist Home was African American owned, and the Golden Drag Cafe was African American owned. My guess is that many of them were, but I'm also guessing that there were probably some that were owned by whites. And that may be the case here in Little Rock too, or in Arkansas. But I'm guessing that at least here, most of them were probably owned by African Americans.
Mm-hmm. I guess is that as part of your research, what could include, finding that out, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And Stephanie wrote back about the Stuckies is in the movie, the Green Book movie, and they were founded in 1937. And she said she knows they were in the Green Book, and yeah, she wondered if about any resources where she can go to locate the exact sites.
As far as any Stuckies exact sites, I'm not sure. There's probably some book out there that talks about Stuckies more in general or more specifically. If there were Stuckies listed in the Green Books, there weren't any for Arkansas, but there may be others in other states.
I think someone else answered the question.
Okay.
That driving while black, African American, and Overground Railroad Green Travel America.
Yes, I've read Driving While Black. The Overground Railroad is a book by Candace E. Taylor, and she is actually going to be coming to Little Rock in July in conjunction with the Green Book exhibit coming here. And I've not read her book yet, but it's on my list.
I think that's it. I don't know. Any other questions, folks?
I asked a question, but I guess I don't know how to get it posted right. So
Okay.
it was because it's at the bottom of the page, but it didn't get up to where apparently you see it. My question was the Green Book issued as a national publication or by state?
It was issued nationwide. The listings in the Green Book are grouped by state and then by city. When it was first published, it focused mainly on the New York City area. The person who started it, if I remember right, actually worked for the Postal Service, and he kind of developed it on the side. And then a few years after he started it, it grew to a national publication focusing on the entire country, and then expanded even further than that to include parts of the Caribbean and South America later on.
I guess I also wanted to tell everyone next month, March 10th, we're going to have Matt Dillinger. He's going to talk about, he's an author of Interstate 69, The Last Great American Highway. Well, I can send you these, a lot of thanks to you.
Okay.
Thanks for piping in, Joe. Figuring that out.
Ralph, shout out from Nancy, a former president and board member who planned the conference with you in Arkansas. This is awesome. Thank you for all you continue to do for SCA.
Hi, Nancy. Good to see you and hear you. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah. I sent you a personal email, so look at it.
All right, I will definitely.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, then, I guess. Thank you.
Sure.
We'll let Ralph get home.
Thanks, Michael, for bringing us this awesome Zoom, another excellent SCA Zoom.
Thank you for attending. We had we had about 50 people.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks a lot. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Sure. And I'll also say, if you think of other questions, my contact information is there. Feel free to give me a call or drop me an email, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.